What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Whiskey Morgue podcast, where we talk about the whiskey we're drinking and the horror we're watching. I'm your host, Mike, and today I am joined by my friend, Russ Flynn. He is the guitarist and bassist from a band you might know, a small little band called X Ambassadors, but also happens to be a really big whiskey enthusiast and actually writes some stellar reviews online. And that's kind of how we connected on here. So, Russ, thank you so much for doing this. And how are you doing, man?
My pleasure. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm doing great, man. Yeah.
I think we'll be better when we get a few pours in.
Yeah.
We were messaging earlier. I said I'm excited to do this just to have a few drinks. And you get online, you make friends, you
Yeah.
start chatting, and this is like the first time for any of those listening or watching that. Like me and Russ are doing this like I guess face to face
Yeah.
via Zoom call, but definitely better in the next step. And we'll eventually get to in person next time you guys are in Toronto there. But for now,
Yes, I would
we
love
we
that.
will hang out and do this.
Yeah.
Um, I always like starting with someone's whiskey journey, and especially I thought about this with yours because there's someone who might say, you know what, like my story is almost pretty basic. That my younger years I was drinking whatever. I had a little bit of a craft beer run, and then finally I kind of got older and I did kind of fall in love with whiskey and it became this greater appreciation. Um, I'm curious about hearing your story because you not only like enjoy whiskey, but you do write and you have that account and you seem to really delve into it. You collect, as you can see, you have a nice collection of spirits behind
Yeah.
you. So yeah, so it's a
Part
little
of
bit
it.
more yeah, than just
Yeah.
like the leisurely hobby. So maybe if you could just share a bit about kind of like how you ended up here, where you were so enthralled with like whiskey and spirits and cocktails.
Sure. Yeah. I think um, if I wasn't a musician, I would have probably ended up in the culinary world. I was always uh, as passionate about cuisine as I have been about music. And um, I think I think through that culinary lens, I started looking at cocktails as a way to, um, you know, work with flavors a la minute. I go
Hmm.
to a party and, or I'm backstage somewhere and there's a few bottles in front of me, and maybe the selection leaves something to be desired. So I end up having to just sort of riff. And I found that to be really satisfying. I remember getting into that in high school. If I was at a friend's house and,
Yeah.
their parents were away and they had a liquor cabinet, it's like, all right, well, I don't know what I'm doing here, but we're just going to start riffing, right?
Everyone else is shooting just Jaeger and Russ is
Yeah.
throwing together some decent drinks. Yeah.
Well, trying to at least.
Yeah.
And then I got to college. I went to University of Vermont, and I got into making hard cider and started doing a little bit of home brewing. Really got into craft beer. I lived with a buddy who worked at Magic Hat Brewery, so that was always in my periphery, and I was always really intrigued by what they were doing at Magic Hat. They were doing a lot of really interesting culinary ish experimentation. A lot of beers that like never made it to
Yeah.
market, um, but they were always experimenting. And I mean, I'm thinking, reflecting on it now. I had a friend whose dad was one of the food scientists at Ben and Jerry's, and
Cool.
um, she would bring home really interesting products that also never made it to market.
Yeah.
And so I was just excited about these things, and especially excited about beverage. Um, I I was yeah I was drinking a lot of interesting craft beer, getting into cocktails. Then I started touring a lot. In my early 20s, I was touring with a band called Rubble Bucket, and they're still around. They're a fantastic band. Um, and we were just doing the Northeast for a while. We would go as far as Colorado sometimes, and I found myself, at the doorstep of all these great breweries and distilleries, and just getting excited by trying new things. No matter what it is, and you know, that started, that led to collecting bottles, experimenting further when I would get home with making, cocktails. And now at this point, I'm typically on the road. I'm 39 now, and I'm typically on the road at least 100 days a year.
Wow.
I find myself in usually most US states at least once in a given year, and usually one or two trips to Europe. I'll go to Japan periodically. I'm going to Australia in a couple of weeks. And I think, you know, instead of like bringing home a little trinket or knickknack to gift somebody,
Yeah.
I've also been excited about the idea of like sharing a bit of where I might travel to with people back home. So, you know, I'll go to Europe and bring back as many bottles as I possibly can.
Nice.
Not not necessarily with purely the idea of enjoying them myself, but also sharing them with other people.
Hmm.
And uh, I love like the educational aspect of spirit collecting.
Yeah. And so Australia, I guess maybe you'll pick up some Starward
Yeah, they're great.
out there. Yeah. I've had a few samples. I don't have any bottles myself, but
I don't either,
yeah,
but yeah,
but
I've tried a few.
I noted that I do envy the idea of like touring and traveling. I get excited, like I do a small trip, like a family vacation somewhere,
Yeah,
and I try not to be annoying about it, but I tell my wife, I'm like, there's like this liquor store here and this here. And because I mean, you and I've talked, you're familiar enough with like the LCBO,
yeah.
and you're like, yeah, when I come to Canada or I come to Toronto, like you're not really looking for anything.
Unless I'm in Alberta.
Yes, and it's funny how you know that because like I'm friends with the importers who like bring craft whiskey into Canada,
Yeah,
and they're like my friend Gene is here, but like all the businesses in Alberta. Like
yeah.
he has a few SKUs in the LCBO, but mostly it's bringing it into Alberta. But it's funny how you even know that just from
I've played
traveling
the
and touring.
Stampede. I played the Stampede a lot. Yeah, gosh, I've played Calgary a lot. I've played Edmonton a lot, and I get really excited about going to like the co-op there in
Yeah,
Calgary. Yeah, gosh, this past year we did a 3 week run with ex ambassadors from Vancouver to Quebec City, and
yeah,
uh, I was so excited for Alberta,
yeah.
just because it's one of the greatest places to shop for whiskey in the world, besides like Taiwan and
Do
Japan.
you remember off the bat if you picked what you picked up, if you picked anything up?
Yeah, what did I get? Oh gosh, I haven't even opened it yet. Holy cow! I grabbed this 9 year Brooklady.
Oh, nice.
It's yeah, gosh. Uh,
Oh, it's like a pick two from.
yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Yeah, I've had nothing but the standard. I've obviously had like some of the Octomores,
yeah.
but I've seen some of those like picks in higher age stated bottles. But
Yeah, this I got really excited about. It's a beautiful presentation too. I love like typically the Brooklady line is known
yeah,
for the baby blue, the robin's egg blue bottle.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, this
Oh,
is
there
one
you
I've
go
been
for a comparison there.
yeah this is one that I've been sitting on for a while that I'll probably crack open soon. But I also got a um, gosh, I got another pick from them as well. What was it? Oh, I don't remember. Maybe like a Glendronach or something like that. But yeah, really knowledgeable staff there. I'm
Yeah,
always excited to walk in. I'm like buzzing with adrenaline before I walk in there.
you do get that, right? And you're like, this is your opportunity to pick up some bottles. What are you going to find? What are you going
Yeah,
to come across? Um, is there any bottle that stands out that you remember like from like, I guess touring and being like, how the hell is this sitting on shelf? And coming across something where it's like an absolute steal, or it's like collecting dust on the bottom shelf somewhere.
absolutely. Yeah. In the fall of 2022 or yeah, 2022, I was touring in South Africa. I played two festivals in South Africa, and I had a little bit of time off in Cape Town. And down the street from the hotel I was staying at was a Spar convenience store. They're everywhere in South Africa, and typically when you walk into these convenience stores, there'll be a glass case with alcohol in it, with liquor in it,
Yeah.
in advance of walking into the body of the store. And I just happened to be walking in to pick up some groceries, and I was eyeing the glass case, and I found a bottle of Blanton's and a bottle of Yellow Spot, and they were each less than $60 US.
Wow.
Yeah, and Yellow Spot here in the States typically goes for anywhere between 100 and $120 right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I paid something to the tune of like $54 US.
Nice. They
And
hadn't got the Blanton's buzz yet, too, or they haven't
yeah,
stopped.
man. Yeah, really great pricing and really great selection in South Africa. Yeah, the Blanton's was about the same price. And I just couldn't carry any anymore. Otherwise, I
Yeah.
would have bought several bottles of each, but I was already to the brim because I was in the UK before that. So I already collected a bunch of scotch and
Yeah.
then,
Yeah. You probably have just like designated luggage just for just for bringing bottles over.
yeah, I've also just flown to countries and purchased new suitcases for the purpose of filling them and bringing them back home. And
The one thing I can say,
I'm very good
sorry.
about declaring stuff now. I'm very good about declaring stuff.
Oh, I've learned too. Um, the one thing that I can usually offer, like my friends in the States, like I usually have like a network of people who will like get me stuff sent up. It is good having the Alberta network with like the importer and kind of skipping that where I can get things kind of directly to me.
Yeah,
But I always say that like the one thing I can offer back to my American friends is that the LCBO sucks, but like 2 or 3 times a year we get the Weller Antique, the Blantons. It's, I think it was like 70 Canadian. And these days, Canadian dollars like Chuck E. Cheese money. So that's it's like $50 US.
yeah,
And so I'm typically, if I see some of that stuff pop up, like, and now like even being friends with you, like I shoot off the text like, hey, there's some like Weller Antique, there's Blanton's, like, do you want
yeah.
any of these to get them out to friends? So like that's the one thing that's decent. Is like I'll often say Weller Antique's a great like a no-brainer for me. I enjoy just pouring it if I don't really want to overthink anything and I want a good like weeded bourbon.
Sure.
And then people are like, oh, it must be nice. You could just pour Weller Antique. But and I know that kind of sounds like that, but it's just it comes a few times a year. It's 65 Canadian
Yeah.
and I'll buy a couple bottles. And so I have like one or two that'll last me for like the year, and then I pick up some more.
And for as much of a drag as the LCBO is, like you're entitled to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's like you have to suffer through that most of the time. Take
Yeah.
advantage of what you can take advantage of.
100%. I wanted to come back to the beginning because I kind of had this moment in my mind where I've done a few of these interviews with a lot of like master distillers, and I feel like their narrative is very similar to yours. So one that comes to mind is like Miles Monroe. Um, and him and I were chatting about whiskey and his journey, and he too was in the culinary world and in a few rock bands. But
Cool.
like I realized, like Russ, you were the success story, man. You're the rock star who made it. Yes. So you might have been a master distiller, which maybe that'd been good too. But you
And maybe I
really
still will
went.
be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can dream.
But it's actually pretty cool. This whole like there's a lot of bands collaborating now, with different distilleries, like doing
Yeah.
picks, doing certain blends, which I think is awesome. It's kind of like not the celebrity label, and it's because a lot of the bands too are like, successful, but not on the likes of like I guess like U2, Metallica, and all these
Sure.
guys. But like working with craft, I think it's cool. Like a lot of like indie bands and craft whiskey companies are collaborating, which is awesome. So maybe, one day we at least have like a Starlight pick, X
Oh
Ambassador
man.
Starlight pick that,
I would love that. I'm such a fanboy of anything Starlight.
yeah,
That would be amazing. You mentioning that, what comes to mind is when I played Bourbon and Beyond this past September. I know Derek Trucks played the day before me with Tedeschi Trucks Band, and they used that as the official release of his imprint. And
yeah.
he did a discussion with Fred Minnick. Uh, I think that's called Ass Pocket Whiskey. I haven't
Yes,
tried
yes.
it, but I know it's bottled and bond. I don't know where they're sourcing it from. The branding looks cool.
Yeah.
I am the biggest Derek Trucks fan, though. He's like him and Blake Mills are my guys. Those are the guys that I hear them and I'm just instantly emotional.
It's
Um,
cool because I feel like, it's easy to think like, you're in a band, you're playing some of these big festivals, but you're still a fan at heart. Like
oh yeah,
you hear the next band go on and you're probably just side stage trying to see if you can watch it. But I know you're usually busy with everything
yeah.
else going on.
I mean, that festival I ran to see War on Drugs. Um, Corey Wong played before us, and he's just phenomenal. And then, gosh, who was after us? Oh, Lucius was playing. I'm a big fan of them.
Yeah, they're great.
They're fantastic. Yeah, I usually if I'm playing a festival, I'm eyeing the lineup and picking one or two artists to go see that I'm just hell bent on making it to. At least a few songs,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. And what's cool is kind of like so we before we got on here, when we said we do this episode, we kind of said, what are we gonna drink and what's gonna be our central theme? And this is a really great segue because we decided we drink some Starlight, and this ties it directly into you playing Bourbon and Beyond Festival.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's cool. I didn't know the other bits about like being a big Derek Truck fan and then getting like you're there, they're playing, he has his release of whiskey, but then you got to go the next day to Starlight and hang out there, which is I still haven't done it. I said I might come out there and meet you when it happened. And now I'm trying to plan it all over again, but I'm super glad you made it out. So, I mean, how was that, man? I'm sure like it was an insane
It,
experience.
it was unbelievable. And thank you so much for that introduction. Christian is just the sweetest person on the planet, and their facility is, I knew it would be great, and I had some level of expectation, but it is so big and so pastoral and expansive. It's like, the size of Central Park, their whole facility, and that they've
Wow.
been on the land for 7 generations, and they have fruit trees, and they're growing sunflowers and wildflowers, and they have these apple orchards and peach orchards, and a restaurant, and
Yeah.
then the still house is beautiful. All their like Vendome copper is gorgeous, and then their rick houses are just. I mean, the first rick house I went into with Christian, where we just picked some stuff and tried some stuff, it was filled with all these super interesting experimental
Yeah.
cask treatments. Just Mizunara and Tokai casks, and um, yeah, it was honestly, it was one of the best days I've had in years. I'm still over the moon about it.
Yeah, you know what? Christian, he's the most hospitable and like you said, like just the sweetest guy. And when he's messaged me, he's like, "Hey man, like you got to come and we're just going to taste through barrels." And then when you told me about your experience, when it's literally just like, "Let's try this. Oh, look, there's this cool thing over here." First of all, I don't know how you maintained a level of like functionality and maybe an inch of sobriety, but like
Yeah,
but like you're in heaven, right? Just everything there. Let's try a little bit of this right from the barrel. I mean, it doesn't really get better than that.
no, it doesn't. And it was really special too because when I first arrived there, they were in the middle of grape harvest because they're, I mean, just as much a winery, if not more, than they are a distillery.
Mm,
And his father's on the line,
yeah,
or sort of sifting through the grapes, and he was involved in that, and stepped away to show me around, and was just such a gracious host. And we got on a four-wheeler, and he took me all around the
nice.
property. But it was clearly this just incredible, inspiring family operation
Yeah.
where, in a moment like grape harvest, all hands are on deck, and it was just so inspiring.
Not even visiting myself, but just like knowing the story and getting to know the family a bit and getting close with Christian. And I've done like one of these interviews a few years ago with him. Is that like what I think a lot of people aspire to be when they say like grain to glass or like like the idea of craft. I remember one time I was doing a pairing, my like horror and whiskey pairing, and I was going like with a Candyman angle with like the bees. So I was just like, hey Christian, man, like I forget what I was trying to get at out of it, but I was like, where do you get your honey? He's like, oh, it's like on the property. And
Yeah.
then he's like, "Do you want to talk to my guy who like does?"
I
Yeah,
saw those
yeah.
beehives.
And
Yeah.
he's like, "Yeah, do you want to speak to him if you have any questions about the honey?" So when you hear about like these honey barrel finish, obviously some casks are imported, and even then, it's very highly curated in terms of what they're bringing in, if they're bringing in cognac or Tokai.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other like wine finishes, like that's all happening there, which I think is really cool. And like you said, it's all hands on deck. Like they all are immensely involved in the process and know what's going on. I think it's just another level of craft. So when it comes to like finishing for me, that's why I typically sometimes veer away from finished whiskey,
Yeah.
depending where it's coming from. But Starlight, I'm like I'll be your guinea pig. Give me anything you experiment with because there's such detail to the craft.
Absolutely. It's like the most comprehensive, yeah, a state operation I've ever experienced where, yeah, as you said, they're producing cider on site, they're producing honey on site, there's so many agricultural products that are coming out of their compound that they have so many flavors that they can play with. It's just
Yeah.
amazing. And even like in terms of their grain, Christian was telling me that if they're using grain that they're not growing themselves, something to the tune of like 80 or 90% of what they're using is coming from within like a 5 mile radius.
Yeah, I think his rye, he said sometimes he goes to like there's another farm that they're close with that's close by.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is right there. I think this would be a good opportunity because we haven't had a pour yet.
No.
And so I had sent you some samples previously, but I figured we'd start off with this, the Family Reserve. I have a nice emblem here. And how perfect is that? That
I
we're
love it.
kind of talking about how really it truly is like a family business. And I always say that Starlight really is family, even if you visit. And like even just speaking to like how you visited, like you mentioned you're playing Bourbon and Beyond.
Yeah.
We had already talked about like I had sent you these samples before even all this came together, and you said you really like Starlight.
Mm.
And I was like, Christian, you're gonna be there, right? And he's like, yeah, like what's up? And I said, like, look, like Russ is a big fan. Maybe pop in, like, see if you guys have some cool stuff to drink. Like, maybe he'll pop by and see you guys. And he's like, well, what's he doing the next day? And after that, I didn't hear a thing for months, right? Because you this was like
Yeah.
far in advance. But so I messaged you and I was like, hey man, how did it go? And like, of course, like he invited you by, took care of you. Like nothing had to be said. I didn't follow up and say, hey, is Russ gonna come by and visit? And
Yeah.
no, I think you even mentioned that like the Uber wasn't working, and Christian was like, here, I'll drive you home.
He drove me back to Louisville.
Incredible.
Unbelievable. And like I think his wife had like dinner on the table or something,
Yeah.
and he was just so, like the most gracious host, so above and beyond any expectations I had.
So let's have a sip of this. So this is a 6.5 year, 113.2 proof, the Family Reserve. So I think this is like a year or two ago that it came up because I think the Family Reserves now are like 8.5 year, maybe 9 year,
Hmm.
which would be incredible because I'm already excited. Like the color on this is quite dark.
Yeah, there's such an idiosyncratic house character to me. Starlight, like they have such a identifiable. There's like a through line, I think, through all of their products that,
Hmm.
and it happens to be something that I absolutely adore. But I love the fact that you take one whiff of one of their products and it's just unmistakably Starlight.
Yeah, I think if like, sometimes I say things get muddled if you're doing like a blind tasting, but if there's a Starlight in there, I think that if there's one that I can pick out, and I can't really pinpoint what it is, but you said is there's that through line because even their finished products, okay, you get that influence, and Christian always does say like it's the bourbon or rye first before anything,
Yeah.
that's what counts, and then you're just kind of amplifying stuff, but there's definitely that through line of characteristics.
And you would send me a sample of a honey cask from them,
Yeah.
and even in that situation where like obviously honey is going to have a profound impact on the spirit. Um, there is just the Starlight character
Yeah.
coming through there.
I'm gonna take a sip here.
Yeah.
So I haven't had this one for a while. I think when I opened it, I ran through it a bit. This is my first time kind of coming back to it in a while. I always get breakfast when it comes to like
Yeah,
this way. I don't, it's like brown sugar, but not like traditional bourbon. There's like maple, and maybe it's like the oak. I get like a like I think of like cinnamon oatmeal.
I think
Um,
that's really accurate. Cinnamon oatmeal. I also get a bunch of banana, a bunch of isoamyl acetate.
yeah,
Almost like a banana pancake, maybe topped with a little bit of cinnamon and
yeah.
maple syrup.
Here we go. We're just building breakfast. I enjoy this.
Hey, I love breakfast.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who, when they were a kid, there was nothing more thrilling to me than having like breakfast for dinner. You know, going to like IHOP or something for dinner, right?
Yeah, I enjoy breakfast for dinner, but my wife gives me shit quite often because I got really into like fasting and
Yeah,
she loves breakfast and nothing like now I compromise like a Saturday morning. I know it's important and having the
yeah,
little one now we will like make a breakfast on Saturday. But yeah, she just
nice.
like absolutely loves breakfast. She's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to the family? Why are you fasting?
Oh man,
The spice on it, I almost then get like this like jalapeno cornbread, if that makes any sense.
interesting. Yeah, there's definitely. I think of jalapenos. I think of like a green semi-vegetal character. There's definitely something in there that's like semi-herbaceous vegetal.
Yeah.
Um, I can get the cornbread, yeah, like a slightly the crust of the cornbread is like slightly charred,
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, that's where we're
which I
going.
love.
Yeah.
Give me the exterior pieces on
Yeah.
a loaf of cornbread, right?
I find I'm just exterior everything. Like we made brownies the other night. I
Oh
want
yeah,
the outside piece. Like and party size pizzas, I think are like blasphemous because like I'm not going on the inside. Like I want that nice corner piece with all that
totally
crust.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up on Long Island and spent a lot of time in the city, and I lived in Brooklyn for 10 years. And I'm always like Sicilian slice. It must be a corner.
Nice.
If I'm back in Brooklyn, there's a place called Paulie G's. I think it's the best pizza in the world, and they do I think they call it the Freddie Prince Jr. And it's it's a Sicilian big open crumb on the crust
Mm,
and sesame seeds on the outside. And they put the sauce on top, cheese on bottom, sauce on top.
yeah.
And I'm always like, I'm heartbroken if there's not a corner slice.
Oh. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna note that down. And I will say this, like as you've kind of like shot off some tasting notes. I'm a big fan of your page. So the page is like Russ Drinks. And the cool thing was that um, I believe I was already even following your page, and I'd been to, like months before I went to X Ambassadors concert. And the funny backstory is that like obviously I knew who you guys were. I knew a bunch of like the songs that were on radio. Really dug that stuff. And my wife had seen you guys years previous, and she was like, "Hey, they're coming to town. We should definitely go check them out." And I was like, "Yeah, like cool. Like we'll go if you enjoy listening to them." And
Yeah.
we didn't get tickets, and then I was like, I know she kind of is bummed about going, so I picked secondary. They were okay, like it wasn't ridiculous. I
Yeah.
picked it up. Ended up being my favorite show of the year, and I'm not just saying that
Oh
because
man.
you're on here, but like for real, it's like when you see like the opening band or like you just go to a show, like in this case, you're just like cool, like I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Um, and just an amazing performance. So if there's one opportunity in this, like I know we're talking a lot about whiskey, which I wanted to do, but in terms of like the band and performance, man, like you guys are tight, you command a crowd. There's such a energy level there where I feel like you guys just have like the audience in the palm of your hands the whole time. And I actually
Thanks,
bumped
man.
into some friends and family who had were at the same show. We didn't even know, and they were just like, "How good was that show?"
Oh
And
wow.
we were just chatting about it at like a family function. Um, on there. I was like, oh, and by the way, I'm going to drink with Russ
Oh,
in a few weeks. But no, it was such an incredible show, and it was great because it caught me by surprise. But then I'm on Instagram, and I'm like, hey, babe, is this the fucking guy from X Ambassadors? And like, sure enough, because then you had like your personal like tag there, and I was like, oh,
yeah.
damn. And that's why I'm like, okay, like we need to make this happen. It was just such a
Yeah.
cool thing. But coming back to your notes, so I start like even in prep for this interview, I started like deep diving some of like I like coming informed. Like you take the time to do this. I want to show respect by kind of doing at least a little bit of homework. Um, and I'm going through, and first of all, like I see all like the craft brew and all this stuff going on. But the
Yeah.
one thing with the tasting notes is like they're very like developed and specific. And I made that connection to the culinary stuff
Hmm.
because I feel like the more that you're experimenting with food and doing that stuff, then you're attaching it to food and memories and like maybe your travels and where you consume something. And I know where I'm going with this, coming back to the pizza. You're a big bread guy, and
Yeah. I'm baking
um,
right now, actually. Yeah, I have a fermentation going right now.
when I was kind of doing my homework, I was like, "Yo, Russ bakes a lot of bread," and my wife's on this bread journey too.
Oh,
Like,
cool.
right now she's doing a lot of focaccia,
Nice.
um, and uh, and she was like, show me some of the loaves that he put together." And I'm like, "Well, he used like a cider here that was like because you were mixing in some of the stuff that you were brewing." But yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was super cool that like all these things kind of overlap in what you do. So whether it be like the tasting notes while you're baking something in the kitchen, you're cooking something, or if you're grabbing that slice of pizza or the corner piece of cornbread, that's why we can come back to this glass and have
Yeah.
that note.
I think, yeah, I'm very, I'm big on cross medium influence. And I think it stems from when I was younger. I remember listening to some guitar players speak about uh, where he took the most influence from. And he was like, I always listen to saxophone players, or I always listen to vocalists. I try
Yeah,
not to listen to guitar players because you get caught up in just a feedback loop and like
yeah,
whatever's comfortable in the hand, right? Whatever comes easy ergonomically on the
mhm,
instrument, you're going to get caught up in. And so it's really helpful sometimes to branch out and transcribe vocalists or transcribe saxophone players, whatever it might be. But I think mentally I've taken that a step further and tried to think about music culinarily,
mhm,
or that's on a macro level, of course, but zooming in a bit from there, I do a lot of home brewing, and I'll allow that to influence bread baking and vice versa.
yeah.
Like, I have so many malt varieties kicking around my home at any given time. And sometimes instead of crushing a given grain and using it in a beer, I'll crush it finer and use it in a bread.
Yeah,
This bread I'm baking right now, I'm doing a rosemary rye loaf, and I'm going
oh
to take some
nice.
flaked rye that I would normally use for brewing
Yeah,
and coat the exterior with it, stuff like
nice.
that. So I just find inspiration. I try to find inspiration, and I consistently find inspiration from other mediums outside of whatever medium I might be operating in a given moment.
That's cool, and it kind of the rye brought me back to like in one of our first conversations. We were talking about like travel, and I said, "Hey, like next time you're in Buffalo, like Bread Hive is like
Yeah.
one of my favorite bakeries." And I kind of laugh by doing this and kind of getting to chat with people and doing the podcast. Like I grew up playing guitar, and if you would like ask me like years ago, like, oh, maybe one day you'll get to like interview guitarists who are in successful bands and whatnot. And as much as like there's a curiosity there, and I appreciate you posting your pedal boards time to time and kind of showing that stuff. It's like here I am, like, well, listen, Russ, like let's talk about bread and and you gotta go to Bread Hive. It's funny like the things that are at the forefront, but
And I
um
appreciate you sharing that with me. I keep a running sort of database of places to check out in any given city, because like I don't have plans to be in Buffalo, but undoubtedly I will be in Buffalo sometime soon.
yeah.
Or someone might inquire with me, if whether or not I have any recommendations for Buffalo, and I would say go to Dinosaur Barbecue and then get some bread there.
Yeah. I
It's
wait, I think I've been to Dinosaur Barbecue actually.
they're yeah, they're scattered throughout upstate New York. There's one in Syracuse. There's one in Albany. I
Yeah.
think the original one is Syracuse. I believe there's one in Rochester. There's one in Buffalo. There's one in Harlem. There's one in Brooklyn, and
Yeah.
they're all great. I'm a big barbecue guy,
Yeah.
and that band I used to tour with, Rubble Bucket, we played a lot in upstate New York. And I kid you not, there were weeks where we would just tour through upstate New York, from one small city to the next, and we would have Dinosaur Barbecue every day.
And nice. You were just building up your input to the Townies album.
Yes,
Like can we work in like Dinosaur Barbecue? Like they're like Sunoco or Dinosaur Barbecue.
it's funny, yeah, what you're referencing is the most recent X Ambassadors record. Is called
Yeah.
Townie, and it speaks to Sam and Casey, the singer and the keyboard player, who are brothers. It speaks to their experience growing up in Ithaca and more generally upstate New York. Um, but I had spent a ton of time in Ithaca
Yeah.
before meeting them and whatnot, and a lot of it was through playing with Rebel Bucket. Um, yeah, I had some uh, friends and family who went to Cornell, and I went to lacrosse camp at Cornell. You know, I'm not the biggest sports guy anymore, but I did go to lacrosse camp at Cornell.
Yeah, you could at least put that on the docket. Like you've done it. There's your sports contribution.
Yeah, and I applied to Cornell for undergrad. I did not get in. Um, I would have gone if I did.
Where was it that you went for music?
I went to University of Vermont for undergrad, and I studied upright bass there. And then
Yeah,
I did my grad work at the Aaron Copland School of Music, which is part of CUNY, the City College of New York.
yeah,
Um, that's in Queens. It's on the Queens College campus, and that was in big band composition and arranging.
yeah.
Not the uh, not necessarily the wisest choice in terms of degrees to obtain, but I learned a lot and I met a lot of great people, and I'm friends with a lot of them still to this day.
If I'm going to defend your decision a bit, I will say I've learned that through talking to a few musician friends that you obviously do the band thing, and I think there's sometimes a misconception that like you're in a band and money might be rolling in and you're touring the world and there's obviously a level of success that you're appreciative of, but a lot of my friends in music have a lot of side gigs where they're doing like they're composing for films and they're doing like commercial jingles and a lot of stuff you probably might not see. And earlier on I had kind of asked you like, hey, like, let me check out some of your other stuff, and you just kind of gave me like the CV, and there was a ton of that stuff there, which I think is cool. And this kind of brings me back to before we got into this, for those of you who are listening, you're like, wait, like there hasn't been any horror talk at all. And
It's
I
a
kind of
horror
reached out to,
podcast.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a, and I always say like it is whatever it is. Like at that time, like right now it's whiskey and music, and I love those two things. But if anyone's curious, so then reached out to Russ and I said, hey Russ, by chance, like, are you a horror buff, like secretly, or and you kind of admitted that your girlfriend kind of like console you when when watching horror films. But there was an interesting bit about like composition, and like if we go back to your studies, as you said that you took a lot of influence from a lot of Hitchcock films, and I forget the name of the composer that you had mentioned.
Bernard Herrmann.
Bernard Herrmann, yes.
Yeah.
So he did like Vertigo, Psycho, and I
And
mean,
North by Northwest, which is my most favorite.
yeah. So what was it about those films? Like now we're looking at like these horror compositions, horror film compositions. Like how did those become influential to like you as a musician?
I think I was intrigued by film music right away growing up. I my first recording as a kid was the Best of the Beach Boys, and then I had like an Ace of Base cassette, and then Hootie and the Blowfish and stuff like
Nice.
that. And um, while I'm digesting all of that, there was a lot of film music being played around my house growing up. My grandmother, in particular, had a lot of film soundtrack CDs. Um, I mentioned to you that I love Jerry Goldsmith and
Yeah.
specifically his Chinatown score. And then I'm a huge Bernard Herrmann fan, and she had a collection of all of his work with Hitchcock.
Cool.
And then I'm a huge John Barry uh, fan, and specifically his James Bond stuff. Like those
Yeah.
those guys are my like three pillars of film composition. And that's not, I mean, I'm not original in that idea. That's like there's so many people who
Yeah.
are musicians and film buffs who are you know fanboys of those three composers. But yeah, I remember as a kid, specifically like the thriller horror stuff. Chinatown is not a horror film, but
Mhm.
it's a mystery. It's a detective film. It's got some very suspenseful moments, and
Yeah.
I think by way of hearing those soundtracks on their own, rather
Mhm.
than just in the context of the film itself, I learned the power of music in general, but specifically the power of music in film.
Mm.
And these days, I think it's so much fun when you see like Instagram accounts. I follow a lot of sound design Instagram accounts
Yeah.
and film composing Instagram accounts, and they'll post scenes from iconic films devoid of soundtrack.
Yeah.
And you'll realize, like I just saw one yesterday. It was the end of A New Hope
Okay.
of you know the first Star Wars film in the
Yeah.
franchise, and it's like it was the throne room award ceremony, and they
Yeah.
showed it devoid of score, and it's a totally different experience. And I love the
Yeah.
idea. I do some film work and some TV work here and there, not a lot. As a kid, I thought maybe I would just do that and that would be my thing.
Yeah.
But then I started playing guitar and playing in bands, and I was
Like I want to
like, I want to play guitar in front of
be.
people,
Yeah.
But I'm such a big fan of film music, and I love any opportunity I get to do it. I do a lot of film stuff and TV stuff with my good buddy Tristan Clopay, who's a great composer, um, and he and I worked on the TV show Startup together,
Yeah.
which was on the Crackle Network initially, and then it went to Netflix. And I just mixed for him the reimagining of The River Wild, which came out last year with Adam Brody
Yeah.
and Kieran Killam, which was not a horror film, but it's a thriller, absolutely a thriller.
Yeah.
And there's such an art to composing for horror and thriller and mystery and detective films and the sort of that whole wheelhouse, but also mixing stuff like that and creating impact
Hmm.
is there's such a craft to it. Like how do you create a jump scare?
Yeah.
You
I've
know,
never even thought of that. I mean, there's two things that stand out. Like, first of all, like the idea of like hearing the soundtrack before watching the film, because everything I say, like the importance of like, you mentioned watching something with devoid of the music, like that'd be interesting because all of these were so iconic because I watched it initially with Carpenter's, Halloween and and but I've never heard a soundtrack first, I don't think, before watching the film. So that'd be a cool experience. But then, like you said, then the idea of how is that effective? And I know enough about mixing that you're like, yeah, is it centered? Are you going to have like this sound, in the back right? And so that's really interesting, kind of being in control of like, how do you paint this picture and yeah, or create the suspense or jump scare.
yeah. And you mentioned John Carpenter. John Carpenter. I mean, what a giant in film in general, but film music. Like John
Yeah.
Carpenter does all of his own music, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, how
And hearing
unbelievable is
about his
that?
stories of just like a synthesizer, like he just like I forget which synth there was one that he always like came back to, but like it's just
Yeah,
like him with a cigarette in mouth, just like okay, I'm gonna like write this piece, and he's doing Christine and he's doing Halloween. It was just super cool.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think the thing is too, there's such a challenge these days. You have to mix for not only the theater, if a film is going to be presented in theaters, but you have to also be prepared for someone watching it on their phone.
I never even thought
And
of that. Yeah.
that's that really requires strategy because, low end is not going to transfer to a phone speaker.
Yeah.
So in order to make something impactful, you might have to like apply a lot of harmonic generation to lower frequencies so that they're even uh, interpretable
Yeah.
on smaller speakers, be it laptop speakers or phones. And whenever I'm mixing something, if it's a film or TV or an ad, I do a lot of ads,
Hmm.
um, or just a record, my own or someone else's. I'm always, in Motown studios back in the day, they used to have a car stereo in the studio so they can
Oh,
check
cool.
how someone might actually listen to what they were going to be releasing.
Yeah.
Because in a studio setting, you have huge monitors, speakers, or like very detailed headphones, but that's not necessarily how the consumer is going to digest something. So it's really important to just constantly, especially in this day and age,
Yeah.
um, be checking something on a phone or laptop speakers or
So
You know, the shitty
here's a good
earbuds.
yeah, here's a good anecdote for you that like I originally you mentioned being like for the phone. I was thinking like yeah, like the at-home viewer and you're like the phone. I'm like, yeah, how much do we consume on our phone? So my cousin who happens to do some production and like has been making music, a lot of like hip hop sampled based stuff for years and years. When I told him I was doing the podcast, he's like, let me just throw together like quick spooky kind of thing, and I have like it's not even like it's like there's like a heartbeat in the background
Yeah.
and there's some like dissonance and sounds. It's cool, I enjoy it. But the first time I listened on my phone I was like, hey, like that lower bass, that frequency and the heartbeat, you didn't add it, it's not in here. He's like, no, it's there. And then I realized that like I'm listening on my phone. I put like good headphones in and I was like, oh no, no, it is there.
Yeah.
But just kind of playing it off of like the tinny cell phone, I was like, wait, what happened to my intro music and that like pulsating heartbeat in the background?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of low frequencies not translating. Um, and unfortunately, because you have the reality that so many people are going to be digesting something on these tiny speakers, you
Hmm.
kind of have to cater to it.
Hmm.
You need to sort of split the difference in terms of what something should be, because it should
Yeah.
be consumed in a theatrical setting, and what it probably will be, which is consumed on a phone. And it sucks.
A huge spectrum. It's like
Yeah.
the best systems like in theater down to this cell phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Most people are not going to be watching on a surround sound system.
Yeah.
And so in the realm of theater or sorry, and horror and thrillers, et cetera, um, yeah, finding a way to create impact. There's like the approach in terms of composition, and there's the approach in terms of mixing. Um, Taking a reductive approach, I find is a lot of times the answer in this day and age,
Hmm.
where mixing backwards or composing backwards can be really effective.
Okay.
Targeting like the maximum intensity that you want in a cue, or yeah, the maximum intensity you want in a cue, both compositionally and in terms of the mix, and then cutting things out, cutting frequencies out, cutting instruments
Okay.
out, going backwards to then create impact there, especially considering like things get compressed on the internet.
Yeah.
It's not just the crappy speakers, but it's also just like the compression that's inherent in conversion of audio and stuff.
Yeah. Well, we talked about even before jumping on here and just like trying to get the right equipment and whatnot. And when it's all said and done, it's all just, yeah, condense and then spit out. And you almost end up with the same thing.
Yeah.
The same thing anyway. One thing I did want to mention, and like I don't know if there's any influence here, but on the Townie album, one of the things that stood out to me because I had listened back to a lot of the Ex Ambassador stuff in the previous albums, but this one, and I think maybe me and you even had a conversation about this, but some of the songs being like a lot more like colored in. And the other day I was actually listening to like I think it was Sonoko, but like the stripped down. I think for like Paste Magazine, you guys did something,
Oh
but
yeah.
you did a few like live performances, and it's in the actual mix too. But just a lot of the stuff that you're doing, like the reverby, like haunting, like the beautifully haunting atmospheric stuff coming in and out, like that's my jam, right? So,
And
um,
it's totally film based
yeah,
approach. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what kind of
Not to
stuck
cut
out to
you
me
off,
is
sorry.
no, 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 but like okay, no, it cut me off because if it's gonna validate kind of what I was thinking, because I felt it was very like atmospheric and like film-esque, and I was always like that even in my own guitar playing, just kind of I love messing with like delays and reverbs, and just kind of like even watching you in a stripped down version, kind of bring that in and out and like color in those because it's kind of like this acoustic version, but there's all these like atmospheric haunting sounds in the background that I thought were really cool. So I thought maybe here's a connection with like the influence of film.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Yeah, and that's all David Torn. David
Yeah.
Torn is such a monster, uh, as an improviser, as a film composer. I'm such a fan of his. I was listening to one of his records last night with uh, Chet Smith and Tim Burton.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I could listen to solo David Torn all day.
Yeah.
He's so he was so just, I don't even know what the right word is, but like he took that atmospheric guitar playing to a level that hadn't been reached before.
Mhm.
And his textural work is something that I was really trying to challenge or channel rather on
Yeah.
the Townie record. Um, because as you said, like there is a lot of space in the songs themselves. A lot of those songs are, acoustic guitar and vocal,
Mhm.
um, where we're meant to, Casey and I are meant to sort of like color in this, dare I say, bleak
Yeah.
upstate New York like landscape, sort of
Yeah.
like trying to evoke that
Yeah.
sonically,
Well,
right?
I think that's what it is with the album. That it feels like more like storytelling, and I know that's obviously the intention, but kind of even how it comes across, I guess, like, yeah, even with you and what you and Casey are doing in those sounds, is that yeah, it really does build that soundtrack in that atmosphere.
Yeah, I think, in like the classical realm, there's the idea of text painting is thrown around a lot in classical composition. And when working on the Townie record, I tried to think about that a lot, where
Hmm.
if Sam might be talking about a specific time and place, time of year, what does that sound like, and how do I bring that into the fold on guitar?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, using a lot of big, expansive reverbs and delays, and
Yeah.
and really like trying to make the guitar not sound like guitar a lot of the time, and
That's my favorite
also,
thing. That
yeah,
I as much as like I love, I've grown up watching some shredders and whatnot, but I really took to, yeah, people who could make their guitar sound like not a guitar. And or like it sounded like there was two guitars in the band sometimes, but you were like, oh no, it was just one person who was playing, and maybe it was just like the strategic like looping or reverb or whatever.
I always had loops going on that record, and I have a lot of loops going live. And a lot of times I'll make the loop and then not even listen to it back. In a live setting, I don't have the ability to listen to it back necessarily, and I'll just
Yeah.
reverse it and then fade it in strategically. So it's really
Cool.
like I love the idea, like I'm a jazz guy, and I love
Yeah.
the idea that every performance is going to be unique, that there's a level of unpredictability to it, that
Yeah.
sometimes something's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think to ride that tightrope walk is a really fun way to keep things fresh for me and fresh for the audience. Um, yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, if I saw you guys, one night and then got the chance a few nights later to see you again, um, like picking up on like different sounds or whatever you did with the loop that day or how you're bringing it out, like I enjoy kind of, I personally like enjoy seeing a band play live for that reason, that and even if there's like little hiccups here and there, that it is live, like you're creating art on the spot. Um, with the idea of mixing things, I think this will be a good idea to go into a pour because
yeah,
we're still on the theme of Starlight. So the next one that I had sent you was this white port finish. And this is a very interesting one. This is one of my favorite Starlight finishes, probably next to the cognac. So, I think it's appropriate. We're talking about like mixing and producing. So they take this and put it in fortified white port barrels. I have mine poured. Do you have yours poured as well?
do yes,
All
yes.
right, sweet. So, and then there's more I want to come back to after we sip this about the making your guitar sound like not a like sound not like a guitar.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
curious
gonna
what
take
you.
it. I'm gonna take a swig of water here just to.
Yeah, maybe I should do the same thing.
Definitely a bit more viscous
Yeah.
than the Family Reserve. Um, Pretty comparable AVB.
Yeah, yeah, so yeah, 108.8
ABV.
or 54.4%.
I'm definitely getting some fruit. It's funny, I'd never had white port until I went to Portugal.
Yeah.
I feel like so few Americans and Canadians are even familiar with white port. I knew it from there's a Frank Zappa song about white port.
Yeah.
But that I had never had it until I actually went to Portugal. And
Well, I'm half Portuguese, and even then I grew up with port, but not like never had white port. So here I was
yeah,
thinking like, oh, I'm familiar like when you see port finishes, I'm like, okay, I know this territory and I know what to expect. But yeah, white port was new to me as well.
I'm getting a little bit of tobacco in here that I wasn't really expecting. And maybe it's just like a barrel tannin thing. I'm not really sure.
I feel like yeah, the
But
oak is different from the family reserve. It's not quite that like molasses barbecue,
yeah,
like overt like charred oak. Um, I kind of put like when I originally reviewed, I think I kind of kept focusing on like seasoned oak
hmm,
and just like I know it's obvious because it's white port, but like just like grape skins, apricot, like a little bit of rum raisin.
definitely get the apricot.
Yeah,
Yeah, almost like the retronasal that you get on like a dried apricot after you eat it.
yeah. And like on the finish, I get like the tiniest bit of like chocolate, like which I didn't expect on something like this. It's an interesting one.
It's really interesting, and it's more nuanced than I expected it to be. Where like I like that it's sort of begging me to like dig in.
Yeah,
It's not like slapping you in the face with big baking spice or something like that.
yeah.
It's really nuanced. Yeah, apricot, some really light peach, not like heavy peach in syrup, like not a
Hmm.
like Del Monte when you handed
Yeah.
your lunchbox as a kid or
What
something
my
like
yeah,
that.
what my daughter eats for snacks.
Exactly, which I adored
I
as a
mean, yeah,
kid.
still eating for snacks, yeah.
Yeah, but more like a fresh, just barely ripe peach. It's not quite mushy yet,
Yeah.
and it's not like the artificial like peach ring candy.
Yeah, yeah, fuzzy
Yeah,
peach.
yeah,
Yeah, and I find like it's funny because when I pick this up, and that being said, like Christian will say this often with like Starlight products, but I believe it was this bottle here where he's like that one there, like let it sit in your glass for a while. He's
yeah.
like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I know like typically it's like people like look at that as like good practice, like let it kind of open up and sit in the glass, but I believe it was this bottle here where he specifically was like, yeah, you got to like let it do its thing and sit there and open up.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Now, even right now, just kind of revisiting it, I feel like it keeps it's even more fruity, putting my nose back into it, a little bit more sweetness and fruit that come out.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah, like definitely a little Christmas cake now, like sultanas,
Hmm.
but it's all very light and like I don't I'm not thinking of this. I have the two whiskeys here.
Yeah,
Like this is such a late autumnal, almost yeah, like Christmassy sort of vibe. The Family Reserve to
yeah,
me, whereas this it's to me this would be
spring.
perfectly appropriate in spring.
Yeah,
Like it's not quite floral to me the way that like if I say that a whiskey is floral, this isn't quite there, but yeah, it's bright, it's fresh, it's sprightly. I don't know
yeah,
what the best descriptor
yeah.
is.
No, no, I'll take that. I'm right there with you. But again, it's almost like what you mentioned, kind of coming back to it, and kind of like I keep putting my nose in there, and I feel like I'm just doing this. If I were to for those listening can't see me moving my fingers around, but I'm just trying to pinpoint like what it is. And I feel like it's like moving target, but definitely like lighter spring. Like there's a bit of orchard fruit.
Yeah.
There's a few things going on there, but everything's like very, very fresh.
And in the background, there is that persistent tobacco. I'm sure it's oak character that's coming through.
Yeah.
Um, there's just a lot more what I interpret as fresh cask influence on this than I
Yeah, and this
expected.
one is younger, right? So this one is it's exactly 4 years. So
Okay,
maybe if it was four and change, but they put 4 years on the bottle.
I'd be curious. It's a white port finish, right?
Yeah.
I'd be curious how much time it saw in the port cask versus the new char American white oak.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm not sure if it's like 4 years, like three new charred, one, like
Yeah,
white port. The beauty of it is that we can
I know. We
you
can
and
ask
I
him.
message Christian and be like, hey man. And he'll know too. Like he'll literally be like, yo, what batch was it? What year? And he's done that. He's like dug up the
That's so cool. What an amazing resource. That's just absolutely amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, this is
Um
it's so interesting. It's sort of like the antithesis of the honey barrel that you sent me, where as I said earlier, there is still the through line of Starlight character, but the honey barrel has a profound impact on the spirit.
yeah.
In this situation, it's like almost. I'd be curious to sample this against like their bottle and bond product,
Yeah.
um, unfinished bottle and bond product, because to me this is so true to their sort of standard release with
Mhm.
just like this touch of nuance added on top of it. That's really cool.
Yeah. And so and what I'll do next time, um, so the only other white port finish that I have is oddly enough the Metallica's Master series, like
Oh yeah,
blackened, like they did like those blackened Master series because like Rob from Stranahan's, and I know you're a Stranahan's fan,
yeah,
so like was with them, obviously got like poached to do blackened,
right,
and I got to speak to him about working with Wes Henderson and like of Angel's Envy, and they did like the white port finish, and that is like much more over the top. And that was
yeah,
my first introduction to a white port finish. So I'll send that over to, I still have, because I had bought two bottles, I still have some. I'll send it. And it's interesting putting those side by side because my guess would be that this one was like not in there that long. Because it's like
yeah.
you said, it's very true to like what maybe be familiar with like a bottled and bond product at Starlight. And then the other one, it seems like just highly influential. Like
Yeah.
the blackened expression. It's really cool, kind of putting them side by side. So I'll have to get some out to you.
That is cool. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, it's a really elegant whiskey.
Yeah,
I think that what the white pork cask is doing here is uh, defying my expectations, but in a really great way.
yeah.
Um, it's so much softer than I expected it to be.
So Starlight, we've talked about how they're kind of like the master. If we look at whiskey, like the masters of like the remix, or if we look at like the idea of mixing things up or collaboration. And I know you've got to do this a lot in your career. Like you've even just talked about working in different bands and collaborating for different projects. But joining ex ambassadors and kind of working with them, there's an extensive list of like people you got to like work with and write for. Like there was Lizzo's album. I know you had
Yeah,
a good chunk of writing to contribute there, which is
yeah,
super cool. Um, Teddy Swims, you guys had recently worked with, which is cool.
yeah,
But for me, and I know like we had kind of touched upon this, but like growing up and wanting to be the rock star and making your guitar sound not like a guitar, you got to collaborate with Tom Morello.
yeah.
Um, like, and I had to ask like this, like what that experience was like because I met him once actually.
Oh,
Super,
cool.
yeah, like back in the day, Much Music they had like
Yeah,
in
of course.
Toronto. Yeah, so I got to go see Audio Slave. Actually, last minute, the quick story is that a friend was like, she was like, my boyfriend hates Audio Slave. Do you want to come see Audio Slave? And so I got to like, so it was like, yeah, the much interactive thing. So
Yeah.
we were like kind of like on the floor. And I remember Chris Cornell said I was a shitty photographer. He was joking,
Wow.
but I got to take a picture of like my friend and him, and it was like the worst photo ever. And it was like you had like one chance, like it was still I think like the shittier digital photos or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, and getting to meet Tom Morello. But as we spoke earlier about being always a fan, like you study music, you're a talented musician, but then still, I don't know if it ever preps you for like someone being like, hey, now you're gonna go like work with Tom Morello and play a song. So what was that like? Because the song was a Collider, right? That
Yeah. Yeah. That was insane. I didn't work on the song itself, but I did perform. We did when we did live performances
yeah.
thereafter, like we did Lollapalooza with him, which is top five favorite performances I've ever been a part of.
Nice.
It was my first time at Lollapalooza, and it was like a really great set time on the main stage. It was right before Jane's Addiction. It was like us,
Oh,
Jane's
nice.
Addiction, and then the Chili Peppers.
Shit.
Uh, yeah, like Saturday, I think at Lollapalooza. This must have been 2017, and I remember rehearsing with Tom the day before in Chicago, and we were initially gonna. Well, we played that night, Friday night, and then Saturday at Lollapalooza itself. But the Friday night show was like a um, underground sort of thing, and
Yeah.
we played more than just that one song with him. I remember having to teach him X Ambassadors music, and that was the real pinch me moment. It wasn't just
Yeah.
playing on stage with Tom at Lollapalooza in front of tens of thousands of people. It was sitting with him in a rehearsal and
Yeah.
having to teach him music. And like I'm an academic musician, so
Yeah.
like I have one way that I stock communicate with people.
Yeah.
And I realized, Tom is such a cerebral dude. He is such an
Yeah.
intellectual. Like that guy, man, you know, he went to Harvard and he's
Yeah.
so well versed on, politics, obviously, but so many like disciplines. But I realized I couldn't communicate him in an academic way musically. And I needed to like be like, okay, third fret, E string kind of thing,
Yeah.
And that was a real pinch me moment where I was like, I never thought I would find myself in this situation. But Tom is a gem, man. We did Kimmel with him, Jimmy Kimmel. That was
That's the
really fun.
performance I think I saw. Like, I didn't know that you guys did Lollapalooza together.
Yeah,
I love digging around. Like, the internet's great for that. You can kind of
it's up
find.
there. It's up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we did Jimmy Kimmel and we did the Forum in LA with him. K Rock in LA, they have this
Yeah.
big Jingle Jam holiday thing,
Yeah.
and that's a crazy um, nerve-wracking situation because for those shows it's a spinning stage, and so while one band is performing, they set up another band on the backside of the stage, and then they spin it 180 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was us and Blink 182 and God, uh, Jimmy Eat World,
Okay.
and they're a fantastic band live, man, absolutely amazing, like amazing guitar tones and everything. But yeah, Tom played with us there. It's the Forum is such an iconic venue,
Absolutely.
and that and Lollapalooza were just standouts.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think the playing aspect is cool because like as like an audience, I'm looking at these videos, sadly didn't see it live, but watching these videos, I'm like, how cool is that? Because like growing up playing guitar myself, if someone was like something like, yeah, you're gonna play with like Tom Morello, but then that tidbit of like, no, like you're rehearsing, like, hey, listen, Tom, like here's how you're gonna play, and you're teaching him something that's even yeah way more memorable than
yeah.
yeah like rocking out on stage, and I'm sure you just get lost in the moment, at that time slot in Lollapalooza, for instance, but that being able to connect and kind of like work on music and teach him to play some music is awesome.
And even I mean, I haven't spent that much time with the guy, but I remember when we did Kimmel, those late night shows, whether it's Conan or Seth Meyers or you know, whatever it might be. More often than not, what you do is you get there at the crack of dawn. You're getting there at like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. You're blocking at 10 a.m. They're going to do like a dress rehearsal at 11. Then everyone's going to break for lunch, and they're not going to start filming the show until 4 in the afternoon. It's going to
Oh,
air at
wow.
11 p.m. Eastern or whatever it is,
Yeah.
but it's being filmed at 4, and everyone's on site at 7 or 8 in the morning.
Wow.
And so you inevitably end up just sitting around with nothing to do in the middle of the day. And I remember sitting around and talking to Tom and meeting Tom's mom. Tom's mom, I think she's like 100 now.
Yeah.
And she came to a couple of performances we did. And she was like this huge civil rights icon that I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of. But she was a really serious activist in the 60s, and both talking to her and talking to him, it was so amazing and inspiring, and something
Yeah.
I would
I,
never
I think,
expected I would do.
yeah, it's one of those things where like, it's easy to get caught up in like what you enjoy. You grow up and you watch a musician and you love them because they're talented and you want to be a guitarist and you want to be a rock star like them. But then, it's that humanistic element, right? That you get chatting and like this is why I enjoy doing this with like whiskey. It's like, I'm sure I would love to pick your brain all day about guitar and tones and why you configure your pedal board in such a way. But it's like, I mean, that stuff's cool too. Don't get me wrong. I can nerd out
Yeah,
about that. But yeah, it's just kind of like there's that human behind it. So you're with like Tom Morello, you're like Rage, and you're hanging out with his mom and,
yeah.
chatting about whatever it might be, or even learning about what she did with the civil rights movement. Like crazy.
At the end of the day, people are just people,
Yeah,
and um, I find meeting musicians like Tom, it is always such an interesting experience, not just because they've necessarily created music that I'm a huge fan of. I mean, of course, in Tom's situation, I am,
yeah,
but also because being a musician like Tom, he's traveled the world over how many times,
yeah,
how much, how many interesting experiences has he had, and um, talking to him, you're talking to just like an incredibly cultured human
absolutely.
who uh, has a lot of knowledge to share.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So if you got to collaborate with anyone else, if there was like a dream list in terms of like who's out there, is there anyone that is like stands out at the top of the list and who you'd want to work with?
Yeah, and it's funny you asked this because we've done a bunch of interviews, and depending on who's receiving the question first,
Yeah.
the Adam, my good buddy, the drummer, he and I
Yeah.
always say the same thing, uh, and then inevitably the person who's going second has to find something else to think of. But
Yeah.
the fact remains that for both of us, it's Trent Reznor.
Cool.
Um, I've always been a huge Nine Inch Nails fan,
Yeah.
and the fact that Trent has now done a lot of film scoring and incredibly effective film scoring,
Yes.
um, I think that's only cemented my desire to work with him. I mean, who knows if that would ever happen? But he's number one, and if not him, uh, Johnny Greenwood for the same reason, quite honestly, because I'm such a
Yeah.
fan of Radiohead,
Yeah.
but furthermore, I'm such a fan of Johnny's film scores. I mean, God, There Will Be Blood is just
Oh, I know.
epic,
Yeah.
and so much. I love the fact that for that score in particular, he pulled so many um, classical. He pulled a lot of classical influence, like 20th century classical influence, and exposed a lot of people via that soundtrack to sounds that they might not otherwise be familiar with. And I don't think it was
Yeah.
done in like um, I think it was done in a really great way where he wasn't simply just like stealing from iconic 20th century classical composers.
Yeah.
But he was overtly referencing folks, and he utilized so many sort of non-traditional like bowing techniques and just ensemble techniques with the orchestral score of that film. It's just amazing.
Yeah. I think what's really cool and like unintentional, but how this all kind of ties together so nicely, and it's funny how it always does, is like we talked earlier about like the film scores and and kind of like your influence. But then coming back to who you'd want to collaborate with, like obviously Trent Reznor is Trent Reznor, and actually on a previous episode, I was talking to another musician where, and even just talking about his releases and just how like, remember you're going to like bathroom stalls to find clues, like in the early 2000s, and it's just like he's like musically in terms of marketing, he like obviously there's other like powers that be behind him, but like he's just always just been so ahead of the curve, like in terms of like you think you got him figured out, and musically he'll push it to somewhere else. Then he got into film scores and just did such iconic work. And it's
Yeah,
cool that it all kind of comes back to some of that influence of like in terms of your decisions with like m music and film.
and he's one of those rare artists who I feel like uh, he doesn't always make the most commercial choice,
Yeah,
and in that way, I think he stays true to his vision as an artist in any given moment. Yeah, he reinvents himself consistently, much the way that
yeah,
like David Bowie would consistently reinvent himself. Both folks would time and time again make choices that were not the maybe what their managers would be recommending that they do
yeah,
in terms of like maintaining a, a level of revenue coming in.
yeah. I think that's the most rock star thing. If you talk about like rock star, it's like someone who you've heard kind of gave the big like fuck you to like the label, and
Yeah,
it still took off, like listen Bowie, like you can't, like whatever you're thinking of doing here, like we gotta pull back a bit. And he's like,
yeah,
no, I'm gonna do I'm doing Stardust, and that's that, and then
yeah,
that takes off. And same thing with like Trent, like anything they decide to do, it's just true to their vision, and
yeah.
either way it takes off and works, even if it's doubted amongst the powers that be.
Absolutely. It's like the antithesis of the Billy Joel approach. And I'm a big Billy Joel fan. I
Yeah.
love Billy Joel. The Stranger is like a top 20 record for me. I absolutely love it. But Billy Joel hasn't released anything new, with the exception of like some classical record at some point. He hasn't released anything new since the River of Dreams record, which came out in like 1991 or 1992 or something like that. He released a single recently. But nonetheless, he just tours playing the hits. He tours playing the hits. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. David Bowie could have done that. He could
Yeah.
have just played, the big hits off of, the early 70s, mid 70s records and
Yeah.
stuff off of Let's Dance
Yeah.
and filled arenas
Yeah.
until he died. But instead, he made all these boundary pushing records. I mean, Black Star is such an
I was gonna
incredible.
say the jazz influence on Black Star is, I come back to that
Oh
all the
my
time. Like
God.
imagine going on that, like you said, you could just keep writing those older albums and then you put out something like fucking Black Star. It's so good.
I know, yeah, rounding up like a New York scene of Mark Juliana and Tim LaFave and um, Jason Linder, who's like such an amazing piano player, and Donnie McCaslin. Like
Mm.
these were guys who were folks that I knew from living in New York and being
Yeah.
out in the jazz scene every night, but they were not household names. Um, and it takes such guts to do what people like Bowie and Trent Reznor do, where they're going wherever the muse takes them, and
Yeah.
they're not going to apologize for it.
Yeah. And it being like, I think in our age group, like we're now seeing like a lot of bands age, for instance, right? And I always say that it's like I as being a fan, it's so hard to watch other fans sometimes. I guess because I try to like be reasonable as like a music someone who played music and whatnot, or like think about what it would feel like to be in a band. And people are like, I wish they played that first album. And I'm like, imagine you heard that first same album over and over and over again. Or imagine like the band kept making music exactly like that. Like how tiresome and boring that would be to be the musician pumping out the same music. So, that's one thing that like as I've aged, like you come back to like certain bands and like certain records they put out that got shit on quite a bit when it came out, for instance, changing up their sound or going in
Yeah,
a different direction. Maybe it landed, maybe it didn't, but either way, it was kind of this evolution, and you want to keep pushing yourself and growing as a band or a musician.
absolutely. And I mentioned Johnny Greenwood. Radiohead is a prime example of that. Each subsequent Radiohead release inevitably found me in a situation where I got the record, I put it on, I said to myself, I don't understand this, but I'm hell bent on getting it and loving it.
Yeah.
Like I remember King of Limbs came out, or even Moonshaped Pool.
Mhm.
And those two records, when I initially heard them, I was like, wow, this is where they're going. Okay, I'm gonna go listen to it 20 times until I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's something here to be appreciated.
Yeah.
And now Moonshaped Pool in particular, like it's in my car right now. I still have a CD player in my car.
Yeah.
I listen to it all the time.
Yeah, and it's funny how that works because then if like there was an announcement that they were going to play that album in full, people would be like, "I'll pay X amount for a ticket to see
Yeah.
that." But upon its like initial release, people are like, "Oh, I don't know about this sound and where they're
Yeah.
headed with it." And that's just the state of it. I guess that's always finding a balance between kind of honoring yourselves as musicians, and I'm sure you see it as a band too, like with X Ambassadors, like you do Renegade, and people are like, we love that. Like, and you're like, I don't want to make Renegade all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always hard. We do a lot of meet and greets and talk to people, and we're always like, what do you want to hear? And on Tuesday, someone's like, man, why don't you guys play more stuff off Beautiful Liar? And then on Wednesday, someone's like, man, all I want to hear is the new Towny stuff front to back. And it's like, you inevitably can't please everybody.
Of course.
Um, and you have to sort of compromise and, do what is going to be most true to yourself and what the audience wants to hear. And um, yeah, it's it's a balance.
Yeah. Well,
I
I will
think
say this before coming on here tonight, my daughter's 3, and she was like we're doing bedtime. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go out because I have this in the setup in the garage.
cool.
And she's like, "What are you doing?" And like, it's crazy because at 3, I didn't think they'd have like this amount of like intellect and like
Yeah.
function where I'm like conversing with my 3-year-old daughter. But anyways, she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm going out for work." And she knows like I kind of like do this stuff where I'll like record and talk to people.
Yeah.
She goes, "Oh, who are you talking to?" I said, "Oh, you know that group that like, sometimes we listen to?" She loves Unconsolable and
Oh,
she loves
cool.
No Strings.
Cool.
And she said to tell you that she loves your music. So that
Oh,
was
that's so
like at
sweet.
3 years old, she's like, "Yeah, you have to tell him, Chick Daddy, tell him I really
Oh, that's so sweet.
love their music," which was why, yeah, I thought like I'm like, it's like kind of like the like here I am like the horror guy. I'm like it's the most cheesiest thing, but I was like, how can you deny that, right? And I'm
Yeah,
like, also, girl, you have pretty good taste in music so far.
that's
So,
amazing. Dude, we did a version of Unconsolable with an orchestra, not this past spring, but the one prior. And I'm really hopeful that the recording of that is going to get released. We did
oh,
it down
that'd
in
be really
Miami
cool.
with a group called the New Deco Ensemble. And I don't know how many pieces it is. Maybe it's like 50. It's a small orchestra,
Yeah.
but it was recorded really well and also shot like 10 camera angles. And
Wow.
I'm really hopeful that that's going to be released because that's really special. I love that song too.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see that whole thing just if there was that much behind it, like if I could watch start to finish
Yeah,
whatever you guys played,
I've
that would
seen
be
it.
awesome.
I've seen
Yeah.
it. It's some of the stuff off Towny, and heck, we recorded it a year before Towny came out.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, it was put in the vault for a while because, of course, Towny had to come out first before anything like that was going to be released. But
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully sometime soon that's going to get it's going to see the light of day because it's really cool.
So, wrapping up and trying to be conscientious of time here for you, man, because I know
Yeah.
you got bread to make, man.
Yeah.
So, so you mentioned like this, which I didn't know, like you guys recorded this like orchestral piece and kind of did this, and it could be, I'm sure that could be a whole bunch of different things, whether it's like live, just releasing singles, its own live album.
Yeah.
You're heading to Australia soon. I know technically the Townie tour is done, but you're
Yeah.
like now heading to Australia. What's on the horizon? What are you guys working on? Anything you want to mention coming up? Maybe even for your like personal projects that you want to mention?
Yeah. We're going to be going to Australia a couple weeks from now, doing shows with the Script, who I'm not really familiar with, but that'll be exciting. I've only been to Australia once, and I think we're playing a couple wineries, which would be cool. I'm not the biggest wine guy.
Yeah,
I love Alsatian whites and I love German whites, Austrian
yeah,
stuff. But and I drank a lot of wine when I was in South Africa that I enjoyed. But I don't like naturally gravitate towards wine. But we're playing a few vineyards, and I'm really excited about that. We'll get back from Australia and just do some college shows in the spring and things like that. Um, I might be doing a musical theater thing with a friend of mine. It's not something I can talk about
yeah.
yet, but I might be doing that in May. And then I think we're going to go to Europe in June and July, doing a bunch of festivals there.
Nice.
And and then we'll probably do a US tour in the fall. I think that that's confirmed. But in terms of new music coming out, nothing I can speak about. Um, but there's some exciting stuff.
Okay, cool. I
Yeah, I
like.
know that's so
I'm
vague. I'm
good. No,
sorry.
no, I'm good at like. Come on, I'm a horror fan. Like, just kind of leave a cliffhanger
Yeah,
or leave it open ended. But the important thing is that there's a bunch of stuff on the horizon. And that being
yeah,
said, like even when I initially saw like the Townie tour kind of wrapped up, at least that leg of it, I'm like, to me, like this album's still really fresh. I feel like
yeah,
considering what musicians get out of an album these days while kind of still in the background writing and doing whatever, I was like, shit, bring it back, like do another North American tour. Like I
I
would
know.
definitely go out and check it out again and then bring some whiskey, of course. But
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll play Toronto real soon because I was talking with the guys recently, and supposedly Toronto is the city that the band has played more than any other city in the world.
oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Toronto, and I've certainly played there a lot with XA.
Yeah.
Um, I've played there a bunch with Great Good Fine Okay, the band I played with before XA, and then with Rebel Bucket, the band I played with earlier, and my friend Alex Stewart years ago, who's a Canadian artist, actually. Um, I love Toronto. I love Ontario,
Yeah.
but and I went to school in Vermont, so I would go to
Yeah.
Montreal all the time.
Yeah.
Um, I love Quebec and I love Ontario, and I'm always super stoked to get back there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, next time you come through, like I said, I'll bring some fun whiskey out
Yeah, dude, we'll hang.
and yeah, for sure. Um, all right. So that's it for this episode.
Yeah,
Russ, thank you. I mean, for joining me. And like I said, like if I'll put all the socials in the bio and the links and I think it's cool to if you're whether you're into the music and you're unfamiliar with ex ambassadors and you want to check them out, like do that. But if you're on the whiskey side and you're just like, hey, like this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about whiskey. I mean, like Russ Drinks is the like at Russ Drinks is like your review account. And that super cool what you're doing there and just the reviews I enjoy reading them
thanks, man.
all
Likewise,
the time.
I love checking out your stuff. You,
Appreciate that.
yeah,
Yeah. So thank you all for listening. Make sure to do the obvious stuff, leave a review, comment. I actually want to hear like what you're watching, what you're drinking, what you're listening to. I'm sure Russ wants to know what you're listening to
yeah,
as well. So yeah, leave those in the comments I'd even say who maybe I should talk to next. I think is always an interesting one too because I've been having a great time doing these. All right, Russ, thank you. I appreciate it, man.
dude, thank you.
I would cheers you, and I just finished my my drink. All right, I appreciate it, man. Have a good night.
Cheers. Thanks, man.
Cheers.